Ende des Events können Sie Fragen stellen. Sie dürfen diese Fragen bereits in den Chat schreiben, wenn es geht, schon direkt auf Englisch, damit wir nicht so viel Zeit verlieren mit der Übersetzung. Das wäre super, sonst wird das natürlich auch gehen. Et maintenant, pour les romans, avant de commencer, voici quelques informations techniques. La conversation est enregistrée à des fins internes. J'espère que ça va pour vous. Je vous invite à passer en mode muet. Et à la fin des événements, vous pouvez poser des questions et vous pouvez rédiger vos questions dans le chat, de préférence en anglais déjà, si ça va. Ja, gerne übergebe ich das Wort an Silvana Imperiali. Sie ist Deputy Managing Director von Gamnet Switzerland. Sie wird gleich unseren Gast vorstellen und das Gespräch moderieren. Et maintenant, je cède la parole à Silvana Imperiali, directrice générale adjointe de Gamnet Suisse. Elle présentera sous peu notre invité et animera la conversation. Alors, Silvana, stage is yours.
Thanks, Catherine. Merci. So let's switch to English for this topic of the day, building a safer digital industry. Over the past year, the consumption of online content has increased massively. And depending on where in the world, we speak about a doubled consumption. As digital advertisers around the world continue to invest in digital media to reach online audiences, it's crucial to have the assurance that their ads are actually seen by real people in the targeted geography, and these alongside content that is brand safe and suitable. Making sure that media buying happens in a transparent, quality environment is critical to driving effective media results. To talk about this topic, I'm truly happy to welcome Jack Smith, who is responsible at DoubleVerify for the demand product suite. And he works to build and deliver solutions to help advertisers and agencies optimize media investments, manage brand equity risks, and increase campaign and creative performance. And Jack is a Global Chief Product Officer at DoubleVerify. And before joining DoubleVerify, he was also Global Chief Product Officer Investment at Group M. At Group M, he developed products and platforms that were used to invest over 80 billion in media spent. Very impressive. Previously, Jack co-founded the machine learning company Solariat, which was acquired by Genesis. He holds 7 patents in artificial intelligence and machine learning for signal detection in natural language and the prediction of consumer media consumption. He brings over 25 years of experience in executive roles. He even worked with me. And in this session, Jack will provide advertisers and agencies with best practices to help increase transparency, build trust, and improve campaign efficiency. This session will also explore how media quality can impact business results and what we can do to build a better industry moving forward. So Jack, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Silvana. Hopefully you can see my presentation and it's full screen. You able to see it?
We do it, but we see it in a presenter mode.
Aha. Let's try and fix that right now.
Displays.
Poof.
There you go.
Ta-da. Very good. Technology rarely works when you want it to, but thank you, Silvana. So today I'd like to talk about building a safer industry. And I think, you know, what we've seen over the last really 20 years of the explosion of digital media is that as media has grown in popularity, as consumers are shifting their attention from more traditional media to digital media, and money starts to flow there from advertisers, that means that there becomes quality concerns such as fraud or things like viewability, really problems that didn't exist in analog media. And those are the kinds of things that we work to try and solve, because we really do want to build a better and safer industry. I think it's also, when you think about what we as media buyers, and going back to my days in the agency world, we always think we're buying the most perfect pieces of fruit, but as the speed of buying media has increased through things like programmatic trading, that's actually not the case. So you're not always getting what you think you're getting. In fact, you're getting some very good pieces of fruit, but also some fruit that are not very good. And I think it's important to understand, at the time that you're transacting on media, that what you're getting is quality. And we'll talk in a few minutes about, about the different components of quality, some of the tools that are available, and also some of the best practices that you can use as an advertiser who's really concerned about ensuring their media quality. And when you start to break down the issues around media quality, we know that about a third of digital media investment can be eroded and wasted through non-human traffic, and that could be fraud, or it could be more innocuous, or really not necessarily bad traffic, but things like search crawlers who are indexing the web. Advertisers shouldn't be paying for that traffic. We know that more than 10% of ads appear in inappropriate content, and then around 50% of ads are never seen. So those kinds of that combination of things can really erode the quality of media, and mean that as an advertiser, you're wasting much more than you think. And the way we think about quality, we really think about 4 components of quality. We think about the notion of fraud, and is your ad being served to a real human and not a bot? Did your ad have the opportunity to be seen by a human? So was it viewable? Was it served in the intended geography? So if you have a language target, for example, and you're targeting a very specific country that has a specific language, and with that creative, you want to make sure that that's running in the intended geography. And finally, is it brand safe and brand suitable? So does it match your brand values? And what our customers have told us over the years is that managing each one of those independently is pretty challenging. So so what we did was developed a single metric that combined them all into one, and it made it much easier for operational teams across advertisers and agencies to speak the same language. So if you're thinking about marketing operations in trafficking or in trading or at the CMO level, you have the same notion of quality, and you're able to define that's very specific to your brand. And we think that's very important, and it's a foundation of quality that's necessary even before you begin to think about how you improve performance. So brand safety and suitability has a pretty significant impact. So if you're not managing it effectively, there's reputational risk, and the risk of low quality really can erode the brand equity that you spent. In some cases, some Swiss companies go back more than 100 years. You don't want to erode that brand equity that you've created. It's also could be misaligned with your brand values. It could be harmful to consumers, and it's basically inefficient. So you're wasting money. So we think that one of the things we saw is that 87% of consumers feel that brands have a responsibility to ensure that their ads are appearing in brand safe environments, and 2/3 said that they would abandon a brand if they see that brand in objectionable content. And most brands believe that delivering their ads adjacent to risky content is really a strong threat to the digital ad budgets. And what we found from our own customers is that it actually makes them spend less. So we want to make sure that you have the opportunity as an advertiser to express as much of your budget to reach as many consumers as you want, but again, making sure that that's in fact in places that are safe and suitable. Now, the news cycle makes things much more complicated, right? So if you look at elections that have happened in the last 2 years around the world, complex news topics dominate headlines, and content is not all good or bad. Much of it is nuanced, and traditional brand safety tools like keyword blocking, so looking for specific words like border wall or unemployment, you may not want to block that. That you tend to block high quality news sources, and we know that that's bad not just for advertisers who want to reach customers in those consumers in those environments. They also have challenges with just overall reach of campaigns and making sure that they're supporting high quality news sources. So we think that the approach that you have to take now is much more nuanced, it's much more detailed, and it's much more specific to each brand than it was even 5 years ago. And a lot of that's been driven by the challenges that we've seen in the elections over the last 2 years in different countries around the world. And if we look at some stats beyond the U.S., so as a whole, in the UK, Germany, and France, we saw a near three times increase in hate speech from May to June of last year in response to George Floyd being killed. That was almost identical to the trend that happened in the U.S. So we're also seeing that there are global impacts of brand safety and suitability, that for an incident that could happen in one country but have effects in other countries. We saw also in the UK that there was a high in December for inflammatory politics and news, the day that it was announced that the first country to approve and administer the coronavirus vaccine. That was up about 57% over the average that month. So there was a lot of disinformation that was perpetuated about the coronavirus. In France, one of the highest daily rates of inflammatory news and politics was August 5th. That was the day following the Beirut harbor blast, and that was 300% higher than the 2020 average. So all of these kinds of events are making it much more critical that you are able to tune your brand safety and suitability, not just for your brand, but also to the speed of the news cycle as well. Now, I think the other thing that we need to think about is that consumers respond positively to ads on trusted news sources. So 1/3 of consumers, when we did a study with Sapio Research, said that they were much more receptive to ads on trusted news sources than they were to ads on untrusted news sources. So we need to make sure that for our customers, we're not over blocking. We're providing tools again that are nuanced. Now, in terms of best practices, I think there are a few things that you can do as as advertisers to really tune your brand safety and suitability controls for you. So you need to make responsive adjustments. So adjustments that are responding to things that are happening in the news cycle. You can't just create your brand safety profile and forget about it, because the changing news cycle means that there might be certain words or phrases that meant one thing yesterday and means something different today because it got used used in a certain way in the news cycle. You need to also calibrate by region and by individual country, because the market by market based changes make sure that you're tuning to individual countries, and we don't assume that every country is the same. We don't assume that every brand is the same. So think about tuning your brand for your brand globally, but also making sure that there are regional adjustments that you can make for individual countries. And when you're thinking about suitability, if you are Disney versus versus Trojan, right? You think about brand suitability and sexual content in a very different way. So being able to have different levels of suitability that you can adjust to, really specific to your brand, or if you have a portfolio of brands, you may have different levels of suitability that you want for each individual brand within your company. And you should be able to have the controls in the tools that you use to allow you to do that. And then finally, you want to make sure that you have a floor, and that floor says that I don't want to run on any content that has terrorism, that is, has sexual exploitation, that is promoting copyright violations or content piracy, and that floor should be a hard floor that no ad should run on. So it's if you think about it, it's a mix of an area that is completely off limits, and you don't want your ads running in that area, plus the ability to tune above that based on your brand values and what your brand stands for. Now, there are many different kinds of tools that you can use, and whether it's our tools or our competitors' tools, there are things that allow you to balance precision, protection, and scale. Again, you want to be able to reach as many consumers as possible, but again, you need to be sensitive to your own brand and what your brand stands for. So you can create lists of sites or apps that are appropriate or inappropriate for your specific campaigns. You could even make it specific to devices like connected television, which we were able to do. So you have a high level of tunability of what you want to include or exclude. If you have trusted partners that you work with, you can make sure that you're including them on those lists. You can also create categories of topics that you want to avoid. They could be brand safety categories like violence, or something that's a little more nuanced like politics. If you don't want to have have consumers think that you've taken a political stand by advertising on a certain political site, you could certainly exclude those, or you could include them as well if you want to do that and positively promote your political stance as a brand. Also, the ability to block ads that are inappropriate in real time. So having multi-levels of protection and being able to do that in all video, including connected TV, is quite important, because as more money shifts from traditional broadcast television into connected TV and digital video as a whole, you want the same level of protection ability across all of video. So that's quite important as well. And then, to go down to very specific tuning, you could even have specific keywords that you want to block. So if there are breaking news that are happening in a very specific region, your marketing team should be able to go in and include keywords that are specific to that breaking news and allow you to avoid that kind of content immediately. And then finally, all of these are subject to exemptions, right? So if you want to override some of these settings for a period of time or in certain scenarios, you should be able to do that as well. So the tooling that you use should give you enough flexibility to be able to capture really the essence of your brand and be able to quantify what you believe your definition of quality is, and then distribute that definition of quality to all of your media partners, and that way you can ensure that you are protecting yourself and providing the highest quality inventory for the creatives that you're running. I think there's a safety and suitability checklist that we talk about with clients. I think the most important thing is to really gain consensus about what your brand suitability guidelines should be. So what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for your brand. So we work with our customers on that. That's very specific to them. We provide a set of tools that can be used in many different ways. So it's important for you as a brand to determine what is suitable for you and how you want to manage that going forward. Obviously, get to know your tools, go through training. That's quite important as well. And understand how classification works. So how does classification of web pages work? So what approach is your provider using? And are there limitations that are specific to your brand that you understand about that? Review your coverage. So look at your guidelines and policies to make sure that you're protected against things like hate speech, misinformation, inflammatory politics, and then constantly adjust your strategy based on the situation. Again, it's not a create once and run forever. You need to be responsive the way you are responsive already, and thinking about how consumers respond to your creatives positively and how performance is happening. You should think the same way about quality overall and adjust your strategy going forward, because again, it's a very, very much a changing environment. All right, as privacy laws change, as news cycle changes, as your brand changes, how do you need to respond to that to build a quality profile that works for you? And then finally, whoever you're using, whatever company it is, whether it's ours or a competitor's, ask questions, right? Ask questions of your support team to make sure you understand how things work, and ask them about different scenarios, run through scenario planning. So ask about particular scenarios that you're concerned about with your brands, whether that's specific to a brand globally or specific to a set of brands in a given region. Really have an open dialogue with your tool provider, your verification provider, to make sure that you understand how quality is being manifest in the tools that you create. So, our hope in all of this is that we want to make sure that advertisers have independent companies who are able to provide transparency into quality, and then also provide controls. And to the extent that that's available, we believe that advertisers will spend more and consumers will respond better to those ads because they are of higher quality. And that means that as we eliminate those low quality areas inside the digital media supply chain, that the experience for advertisers, for publishers, and for consumers become much better. And through that, we help build a better industry. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Jack. So lots of information, many topics that we'll go over again, just to make sure that they are also clear for everyone. So let's start with a key word that you've been mentioning many times, but just to reiterate that, what role does quality play in how your customers allocate their media spends?
Yeah, it's a very fundamental question. I think, first you need to establish what dimensions of quality you want to measure. Make sure that you're measuring it independently, so you're not relying on a single publisher to define it for you, so that you're defining it globally and then tuning it locally. I think that's really the first step in what we call media supply chain management. If you think about physical supply chains, that's the physical supply chain. You're trying to eliminate low quality, and then once you eliminate all the low quality raw materials in that supply chain, then you can really focus on optimizing that supply chain. And that's a progression we're starting to see happen in media. I think where we first saw this happen was viewability, right? That was really the first measure of quality that advertisers use at scale, and many advertisers started using viewable CPM as a way to measure how the relationship between the quality of the inventory and how much they're paying. Now we see that with our authentic ad, and the relationship between the performance of the authentic ad itself, and then the performance of all the creatives that actually meet that threshold of being an authentic ad. So it has all those dimensions of quality.
Definitely. And if we move to the concept of brand safety, what does that brand safety mean to you and your customers? And how has brand safety evolved over the past year, especially with regard to the pandemic or movements for social justice?
Yeah, it's evolving in many different ways. I think we've seen the rise of misinformation happening, a lot of misinformation around politics. And then the last year, the amount of information around the coronavirus has really exploded. And if you follow, there's at Oxford University, they have a project called the Oxford Disinformation Project, and they track disinformation about different kinds of topics and where that disinformation comes from. And at the beginning of or at the end of 2019, we saw very little information at all about COVID, but then we saw an explosion of misinformation about COVID. So the ability of our customers to be able to tune to that and make sure that we're not over blocking, so make sure that we're eliminating all of the misinformation content, but making sure that we're not misidentifying the good information. So, for you should wash your hands for 20 seconds with soap and water, that kind of thing. It's a challenging problem, and we discovered that we need to minimize what we call false positives. Same thing happened with social justice in the U.S., where there's a minimal there was a lot of information, a lot of misinformation mixed in with good information. And what we saw some of our customers interested in was actually supporting different kinds of social justice movements. So if our tools were mischaracterizing or misclassifying that information, then they would have blocked it. So we needed to be sure that our tools were tuned to the nuances and the differences between real information and false information. And that's really that's really the biggest evolution that we've seen in the last year, is the ability to adapt our tools and our methodologies to things that happen in the news cycle.
Yeah.
And I guess, one thing I would be interested in understanding from you, Silvana, is, are there specific kinds of challenges that are unique to Switzerland? Because we don't assume that we allow you to build a global profile and then tune it locally, and then our support teams are speaking with our clients in individual markets to talk about unique challenges that are in markets. Like, what is, if we think about quality, what are some things that are unique to Switzerland?
Well, Switzerland, I guess, is facing the same type of challenges that we see globally, the ones that you mentioned. Now, in terms of specific challenges, being such a small country, which is multilingual, and people speak many languages, so you do reach out sometimes to inventory, which is not only the Swiss trusted inventory, because people are consuming foreign content, which is not always trusted content. And so this can be a challenge in detecting ad fraud and so on. And the other thing is in terms of geography, being sure that you're really targeting the specific people, because it needs to be very granular.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when we see that challenge in not just in Switzerland, we see it in Canada, where there are language differences between English and French. In parts of the US, where we have very large scale publishers who are publishing in Spanish and in English, and we have advertisers need to make sure that the safety and suitability works in all those languages. So we cover, I think, 30, I can't remember the exact number now, I think 38 languages total, which is about 99.6% of all traffic on the internet. So we have to cover all those languages, and we're slowly increasing the number of languages out for smaller and smaller pockets of inventory, because those are consumers that advertisers want to reach. Even though, if you think about 99.6% of content on the internet, that 0.4% is actually quite a lot of content.
Definitely. And what are the other challenges that you have in measuring and monitoring brand safety and suitability?
Yeah, the biggest one really is certain publishers don't want third parties to measure. They want to have their own view of what quality is and force advertisers to adhere to that. I mean, that was one thing that when I was on the agency side, we pushed against, because we always wanted independent verification of what was happening in platforms. So you should always be asking your providers, your inventory providers, your inventory partners, for independent transparency and controls. And whether it's us or our competitors, it doesn't matter. But we think that's important for an advertiser to be able to see with the same definition of quality across all providers, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or the open web. We think that that's an important thing going forward. I think the other thing is that technology changes with cookies going away and browser changes and the inability to track from one iframe across sites. Those are challenges that we started thinking about a few years ago, and started to design our systems so that we weren't going to be impacted by that. So I think, but we never assume that that we're always going to stay ahead. We have to constantly work on our infrastructure and the way that we do measurement and blocking and protection to ensure that that everything works as advertised.
Sure. And talking about the tools, what are some of the tools that you recommend for brands that want to achieve scale while still protecting their brand reputation?
Yeah, I talked about a few of them in the presentation. I think if you think about brand safety and suitability as holistically, most brand safety and suitability companies do provide some level of inclusion and exclusion list. I think one of the things that's really challenging now that you should be asking your provider about is, how are you covering things like CTV? Connected TV is the place now where all fraudsters are going, and there's a significant amount of fraud happening in connected TV, and we're constantly uncovering new and different kinds of fraud schemes. I think making sure that it's wide coverage, and also that you're, it's specific to making sure that you have multiple layers of protection within your tooling so that you are able to block in environments like connected TV. So you could block an ad from delivering if you see that it's fraudulent or it's not safe or suitable for your brand.
Yeah, as you're talking about connected TV, so let's talk a little bit about these emerging
Yeah.
tools. So the biggest challenges and opportunities. So you talked about the challenges. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in digital video advertising over the next year, let's say?
I mean, I think obviously the biggest opportunity is just the amount of the amount of inventory that's available now in connected TV, right? That's a massive opportunity to reach consumers in a very different way than you could through broadcast television and or cable television or satellite television. So I think that it's that's a massive opportunity. I think we should not fool ourselves into thinking, well, there's no fraud there, everything is viewable, all the content is brand safe. It's not. It's digital media, and it has the same kinds of challenges that all digital media has. But I think, again, if you're using brand safety and suitability tools that are third-party tools and you're verifying it, it's a massive opportunity, and it's only going to grow, particularly as more inventory becomes available, as smaller publishers are able to publish high-quality content in those environments. It's also exciting for someone who's interested in viewing new and different kinds of content that wouldn't have been able to be distributed somewhere else. And I think that's also pretty exciting for brands too.
Definitely. Let's you've touched upon it, but let's go back to these new privacy regulations. It's my favorite topic, and the announced death of the third-party cookie, which has affected the business model of several clients. So what measures have these customers put in place in order to ensure that they are compliant with these new regulations?
Yeah, well, it started really with GDPR. I think in many ways the EU has been much more advanced, much more forward thinking about the effects of privacy generally as it relates to consumers, and that's the way we should be thinking about it first. I think our customers, the way they're looking at it is while it makes it harder to understand if you're getting what you're paid for, if you're getting what you paid for, and what effect an individual ad has on an individual outcome, I think that also presents an opportunity for the companies and our clients specifically who are able to figure that out before others, right? Because we've seen a wide spectrum of responses to that, and I think a lot of the European companies, European headquartered companies that we work with have been thinking about this a lot longer in a lot more detail and have a much more nuanced response, whether that's thinking about creating better first party data assets, striking deals with publishers that allow them to have additional information that they wouldn't have gotten before. It's those kinds of tactics that are allowing the more forward-thinking companies to really get ahead of that, and also just thinking about any data assets you have inside your organization. most companies are now looking at those as an actual asset. And I remember my early days in the agency world, we had customers who were just collecting data, but not really thinking about long term how they wanted to use it. Now they're really thinking about that deeply and developing real audience strategies and data strategies that are going to make the data and their business a lot more sustainable.
Definitely. And now looking ahead, so how are brands beginning to build on quality metrics to drive performance?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the one that we're thinking about most right now, because we think of, again, to use the analogy that I talked about in the beginning, where as we eliminate the waste and the low quality from the inventory pool, what are you left with? And if you understand what you're left with, can we reuse some of the signals that we used to understand whether content was brand safe, whether content was viewable? Can we reuse those signals to actually connect the high quality inventory to outcomes and understand how each individual signal influences that an outcome? So for example, it might, we look at things as in two buckets related to performance. Exposure, so what was the experience of the ad inside the content? Did the ad take up 100% of a very small mobile phone screen, or was it taking up 50% of a large desktop screen or a television screen? And what's the difference in response between those? So that's the exposure side. Then on the engagement side, was someone actually interacting with the ad? Were they mousing over? If they were on a tablet, were they expanding or contracting the content? We don't need to know who the individual is, and it's completely privacy safe because we're not collecting cookies on them, but we can start to link both exposure and engagement to top of the funnel metrics. We just released a case study with Mondelez where we talked about the relationship between those metrics and brand lift, and we're also doing it with lower funnel metrics, conversion metrics, with one European telco where they're linking to cell phone contracts. So those two buckets of metrics with there are about 50 different individual data points within those. How does that link to performance as defined by an individual advertiser? Because again, for us, all of this should be customized to an advertiser, right? We don't believe that one size fits all, because each brand is unique and each strategy is unique. So we're trying to understand on an individual basis how quality ads affect performance.
That's very exciting, especially the fact of looking at it down the entire funnel. So that's so I'm turning to the audience, the larger audience, just to see with Catherine if we have some questions or people that want to.
Well, at the moment, there's nothing in the chat. Okay, if you don't want to write some questions down, just speak it out or come forward with it. No problem.
We covered all the topics in such a deep way.
I'm sure you have some more.
Yeah, we could talk much longer about any of this stuff.
Yeah, and were you able so far to see some trends in these in the fact of driving performance? Because usually we think about brand uplift, of course, in taking care of brand safety, but for performance, that's actually a new spin, which is not very common.
Yeah, we have, and it's interesting. When we spent about 2 years and 2.5 years developing the product, and we worked with a few of our larger customers on the product itself. What was interesting to me, because I've built a lot of different kinds of products over the years, was that we came up with many more uses for the product than we expected. So when we started, we thought, well, someone might want to use it just for optimization for performance and conversion. But what we found is that and the Mondelez example is a good one, that brand lift was interesting, because brand lift studies actually take a long time. So if we're able to understand that certain kinds of signals are indicating that brand lift is occurring, it's an early warning that you can use to start to tune the campaign before you get the the full brand lift study back. I think that was one interesting thing. I think there a couple of others were that on the optimization side, looking at programmatic guaranteed and private marketplaces on programmatic versus open exchange. That was something that traders felt that they didn't have as much visibility into, and a lot of the data signals they had weren't good enough. So should they move more money into the open exchange versus in private marketplaces that they negotiate with individual publishers? That was a question they want answered. And then the final was as something that didn't occur to us because we were thinking like media people in a very specific way, is that there are actually a lot of challenges in understanding creative performance. And creative performance, the creative performance, particularly on the exposure side, if the ad is exposed on a large screen and it takes up the majority of the screen versus taking up a very small part, if it's a banner, for example, on a mobile phone, those are very different experiences at the opposite end of the spectrum. And you could definitely see differences in not just the type of creative, whether it's a banner or video, but also the relationship between just the size of the content, or the size of the creative against the size of the content, and the ratio there. And then finally, are people actually stopping when they're scrolling? Right. So if people stop during the scroll, obviously it's going to have a more prominent brand impact. But now you're able to quantify that. It's we always assumed it, right? It makes perfect sense. And if you've been in media for a long time or in research for a long time, it makes perfect sense to you as a media researcher. But we were able to quantify that. So but the individual metrics can be quite different depending on the campaign, creative, and strategy combination. So again, it's all about, for us, trying to understand, specific to an individual advertiser and their outcome, what signals actually matter.
Okay. Anything else from the group?
No, not so far.
We have a shy audience. So according to you, Jack, if you were to give a broad message now on things that people, I mean, you've touched upon almost everything, but the key message for now advertisers and agencies that are here in the audience, if they need to take something home?
I think the first is that you should ask for transparency and control, and make sure that the media partners that you're working with allow independent companies to validate the quality. Again, whether it's us or our competitors. For us, obviously we'd like for you to use us, but we think that's probably the first step. And then once you have that transparency, make sure that you're defining what quality means for you. What does safety and suitability mean for you and your brand? Because low quality is corrosive to your brand equity. And everyone that's on this call has spent years and in generations, even before us on this call, that those brands started many years ago. And you don't want quality to erode that equity, and you want to use it to build equity. So think very carefully about how quality relates to your brand and your brand values, and make sure you're doing everything possible and using all the tools to support that.
Okay. In terms of trends, what's for you like the biggest trend coming up? Because I mean, the last time I saw you, where you were talking about drones, and I'm like, what?
That's right. I was talking about drones in Germany. Yeah, I was talking about drones. I think obviously drones are important. I'm not going to talk about drones today, but I think what we're seeing now in machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to be transformative for advertising in a few different ways. I think there's a project called GPT-3. It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, third version of it. And what it's done is it's basically taken all of the text on the internet created language models that can be used in many different ways. And one of the interesting things I saw an application of it recently was to basically write creatives automatically and assemble them with images. So I saw this for a hotel chain, being able to write the text. And when I was doing this kind of work more than 10 years ago, it was extremely cumbersome and it didn't work very well and wasn't very good. It's actually quite good now. So I think that's quite exciting, because it means that this idea of customizing creatives for individuals, or being able to build a lot of creatives at scale through individual components, it's very different now than it was even 3 years ago. And there are some challenges with that. I think one of the things that we need to be concerned about, not just in our industry, but it certainly affects us, is the effects of AI and the ethical use of AI. And the EU has just started started talking about ruling on ethical uses of AI. I think that's going to be quite important, but it's going to have it's going to have profound impact on the marketing organizations that we see, because we're able to now automate things, trafficking workflows, things like that were much too difficult to automate using machines 10 years ago. And I think what'll happen is it's going to allow the people who are working in those marketing organizations to start to move back to thinking about strategy, because the digital media world is so complex that we spend a lot of our times kind of stitching things together, and it's not work that humans should be doing. It should be work that machines should be doing, and the humans should start thinking about higher level creatives and how to resonate with the audiences and higher level narratives. So to me, that's quite exciting for the industry as a whole.
Definitely. Well, so we moved to something much larger, but thank you for that. It's always a pleasure. So Catherine, I assume that you don't have questions.
Yeah, well, it would be last chance to raise a question or to raise your hand, but it doesn't look like. Well, well, in this case,
you can find Jack's profile also on LinkedIn if you prefer to ask him something directly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
No, I thank you so much for having me, and appreciate you listening. I apologize that I wasn't able to do it in Swiss German.
Well, no problem.
Or even, man, my French is my German's worse than my French. So.
Well, thank you too, Jack and Silvana, for the interesting speech. Well, I took a lot of insights out of it. I hope the audience too. And well, yes, in the next LSR Live talk, we will talk about cookieless future, obviously. And I hope you are all again live with us. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to talk to us, to LSA, or we definitely have the speech on our website if you want to, go through it again. Thanks so much.